Rich, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us on Product Leaders Journey. I've been looking forward to it since our conversations in the past.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy to talk about this topic with this audience.
And Rich, I know that you like to start your meetings in a very specific manner. Any guidance, any instructions for our listeners as they look to participate in our how we kick off here?
Absolutely. And what you're referring to, Rahul, I think is that I like to offer what I call a minute to arrive, basically to get our attention and our brains, which can be a little bit scattered, into the current moment. And in order to do that, you have to exercise those skills. So this practice, which I'd love to offer you all, is what we call a micro practice. This particular one, about 30 seconds long. It's called a 3-breath practice. And it's a way to kind of just return to this moment. If you're coming from a previous meeting, if you have some other thoughts or other things going on, it's a nice way to just kind of allow yourself to arrive with your full attention. And, there's neuroscience behind it because it helps re-regulate the nervous system. It helps train the attention. So let's try it.
Great.
So you can do this if you're sitting, standing, eyes open, eyes closed, whatever you like. But first, just find yourself in a posture that's awake and alert at the same time. And we'll begin this 3-breath practice. So taking one slightly deeper inhalation, bringing that breath in and drawing your attention to the breath as it's making its way in and then out of your body, anchoring your attention on the experience of breathing. The next breath, again, a slightly deeper breath, breathing in. And as you exhale, relaxing your body, one small measure, connecting with your body. And then the final breath, taking a slightly deeper breath again and considering what's important in this moment. What's important now? What's important now? And notice what comes to the forefront. Keep breathing. And then when you're ready, we can rejoin the conversation. So thank you for that. It's a very brief attention training practice, breath, body, and priority or what's important. And it's a nice way to start meetings. One of the practices that we introduce when we start meetings.
This is so wonderful. And even in these 30 seconds, I can feel my energy shifting. I feel more settled. I feel my voice changed as compared to before versus now. And it's just a much more calmer presence that I bring to this meeting and to our conversation. This is just wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think there's a reason for that, which I'll just share, is that, we started to tap into what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, the responsive aspect of our nervous systems, the neural mechanisms that bring a little bit more calm and clarity and executive function, as opposed to sort of the stress and reactive part of our brain that we can often be in when we first arrive from many other experiences and events. So it's a way to quickly recalibrate.
Great. And the beauty of this is that you said this is a micro practice and it's only 30 seconds. So in today's day and age, when we are just rushing from one meeting to another, taking 30 seconds to just ground ourselves, center ourselves, and then be fully present in the next conversation that we are going to be in. This is a huge ROI on these 30 seconds here.
Yes, really helpful in teams as well, when we can all just kind of gather together, settle, take 30 seconds, and then get to business.
Yeah, wonderful. So you started at JP Morgan Chase and then at Bank of America, doing talent development, leadership, and learning. So was this your calling?
It was, just for everyone, I'm by training a psychologist. And so what would a psychologist be doing, in financial services? Why is a psychologist on a podcast for product leaders? But I can tell you that when I was taking my training years ago, first of all, I was interested in it because I focused on organizational psychology and basically the core factors that contributed to effective leadership, effective teams, and organizational cultures that thrive. And then I went into industry with the explicit idea that I can bring some of that research, some of that knowledge base into organizations
Mhm.
to support their leadership, organizational development, and general learning. Um, and so, yes, first place was JP Morgan Chase, then Bank of America, both often working with the investment bank, which
Mhm.
is a very, it's a particular environment, as you all know, probably like product leaders here, very analytical, very fast paced, very hard charging, achievement oriented, outcome oriented,
Mm.
all good. And at the same time, it's people who are delivering on those outcomes. And so leaders would often need tools to be able to really help bring their teams together and work effectively together. And so that was my job. It was
Mhm.
called leadership, learning and leadership development. And I worked with a lot of the managing directors, often on the trading floors and other places, to help optimize team performance, individual performance, taking a kind of brain based approach, oftentimes, also using behavioral research. And so that was a calling because that is, like I said, I've been a student of human nature. That's why I went into psychology, where I got a PhD in
Mhm.
this stuff. And then I was able to apply it in that setting. That naturally led then to me getting recruited over into tech, where I went over to eBay and I ran learning and development there for a number of years, all again on this notion of how do you advance leadership effectiveness, team effectiveness, and
Right.
build a culture of high performance. And then I think importantly, sustain it because as we know in high performance environments, burnout's a real thing, attrition's a real thing. So my job was to help provide some of the tooling from a people and culture perspective to enable that.
Mhm.
Eventually, I went to Google, where I ran executive education, which is leadership development for the senior most leaders at Google. So that would be basically directors through SVPs
Mhm.
and offering them the experiences, programs, supports, coaching. And I think the main thing I would like to highlight is that by the time I arrived at Google, having had a grounding in neuroscience and behavioral research, what I found was that there was a beautiful marriage between the things we were trying to achieve in terms of high performance and neuroscience and
Right.
attentional and perceptual training practices like mindfulness and meditation. And they all
Yeah.
came together at Google because I happened to share an office with an early Google engineer by the name of Meng Tan, who had begun developing a curriculum called Search, like Google Search,
Right.
inside yourself. It was neuroscience based mindfulness and emotional intelligence training. Then I helped him kind of grow that and develop that and spread it within Google. And then finally, separately, we spun it off. It became wildly popular, by the way, with
Uh-huh.
product leaders, engineers, all employees, because it was about trainable skills around these qualities of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, rooted in neuroscience. So it wasn't fluff. It was really about training your neural networks
Yeah.
for executive function. And then we eventually spun that off as a separate individual educational institute, which I run today, called SIY for Search Inside Yourself Global. And we operate now in over 60 countries, mostly working with Fortune 1000 companies. We've trained over 250,000 people in these skills. And so I followed my calling and I'm living my dream.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Nothing better than that, right?
Yeah,
Because it
exactly.
then there is work is not work. That's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. So going back to your journey in leadership development, talent development, given the velocity of work today, do you find it challenging for companies to be able to carve out time, bring employees out of their routine and velocity to pause for a few minutes or days to go through these programs and training and really invest in that?
Yeah, it is a challenge. And at the same time, you could kind of um, portion it out over time so it doesn't have to be overly taxing on the schedule,
Hmm.
on the product cycle, on whatever it is you're trying to achieve. It's just like carving out time for a walk in the daytime or maybe some
Hmm.
physical exercise. And that's why at Google, we were able to put it in a way that allowed people to come. Sometimes it's an hour or less, a week, to acquire the core skills. And then once you acquire that threshold level of tooling, then you could kind of self-sustain. And we have
Yeah.
tools to support the self-sustaining part of it. So there's ways you can format the skill development that work with like very busy, demanding schedules.
Right. Yeah, and especially in the area of learning and development, unless you
Mhm.
have an opportunity to apply that learning on
Mhm.
some consistent, regular basis,
Right.
that learning doesn't really take roots. Otherwise, it just remains as sort of intellectual exercise or an intellectual pursuit. So, uh, how do you make this much more repeatable and consistent for people to take it forward?
Well, we access everything through our devices, so you have to show up there as well. So,
Yeah.
asynchronous learning and practice opportunities, guided practices, research, all the knowledge and content that you need is available asynchronously, together with, I think, a synchronous or live experience, whether that's virtual like this or, an in-person experience to help kind of install and get that basic
Yeah.
threshold momentum going. And then I think the other factor is really a cohort or a community of people who are
Right.
similarly exercising these skills. So back at Google, we had started a community called G Pause,
Okay.
Pause, Google Pause, G Pause. And that is still going today. And they have like informal mindfulness practices pretty much every day of the week across the globe. There's dedicated rooms for meditation and things like this. There's events that happen. There's refresher courses. And that's all kind of shepherded and championed by the employees themselves. There's no
Right.
approvals needed. It's just kind of something that some enthusiast super users do on their own, but it's supported by some of the content that they've had from, for example, Search Inside Yourself and their access, and sometimes it's as easy as people showing up in a room for 10 minutes and they'll listen
Yeah.
to a quick talk and a guided practice. Whether it's a meditation or just a calming practice or a focusing attention training, having all of the tools at your disposal and then some level of cohort or community that
Hmm.
has that is using the tooling is what helps sustain it.
Yeah. And I assume that, like any initiative that goes forward in an organization, there is the grassroots, bottoms up
Yeah.
commitment and involvement from the employees, but then there is also championing from the top so that it creates that good alignment between bottoms up and top down to keep that moving forward. So, in that context, um, do you see a C-level role coming
Mhm.
up? We've seen chief innovation officers when that was a boardroom conversation, chief digital officers, chief data. Is there a chief mindfulness officer in the future?
There is actually SAP has one.
Ah,
He's a VP of their global mindfulness practice. They're our biggest client, and a guy named Peter Bosselman, and they've
okay.
been doing it for 10 years, and they've trained over 17,000 employees at SAP in our
Wow.
curriculum, Search Inside Yourself. And so his title literally is Chief Mindfulness Officer. And
Nice.
at times he's reported out to the SAP board about their efforts because if you're going to train 17,000 employees on
Right.
something, it better be there better be an ROI, which there is,
Yeah.
and it's about 200% is what they've calculated.
Mm.
The cost of the employee time and everything that goes in compared to what comes out in terms of performance, productivity, efficiency, collaboration, creativity. They've actually measured it over time, and
Yeah.
they've seen that that's the ROI. And they've also seen this sort of statistically significant levels of improvement on those parameters as well. So he
Nice.
shepherds those efforts at that company. And I think increasingly you'll have people, it may either be a part of a role like chief wellness officer or a role in itself because
Mhm.
it's a big body of work.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to see how they've calculated the ROI from
Mhm.
time invested in training employees on mindfulness practices. And maybe this is something that other companies can look at and see, well, there is a framework, there is a way to do this inside any company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you a little bit because I have some of that at hand and it's public knowledge. So, for example, they measure something called leadership trust. They have an index. And they saw that people who went through these trainings on emotional
Hmm.
intelligence, the participants had improvements of 80% in their leadership trust index.
Wow.
And every 1% change in the leadership trust index is about 100 million euros in operating profit. So they actually can formulate what then the return on investment is.
Fascinating.
In
Yeah.
addition, I can, again, these are public. There's like
Right.
articles been written in Forbes about this. Um, through our SIY programming that's reached now 17,000 employees, what they've seen is 9.2% increase on employee well-being, 12% increase in meaning that employees describe in having about the company and their work,
Yeah.
6.5% increase in employee engagement, 6.5% increase in employee engagement. So that alone is a huge driver of ROI.
Yeah.
Then you also have 7.6% decrease in stress, 12.2% increase in creativity, 6.9% increase in communication, 5.2% increase in collaboration. So those are very concrete data points that
Yeah.
help formulate the ROI.
That's fascinating that they've been able to take these attributes of employee engagement, performance, leadership trust, and then tie that back into economic value to the company. That's
Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah.
it's essential. I think you have to link to the economic values you said, the business case, but then also I think the strategic value of it, because in today's world of agile transformations and massive organizational shifts, the advent of AI and
Right.
automation, how can you effectively manage that change? The biggest risk factor is the people who are going
Yes.
to adopt it, and the ability to collaborate, to trust, to work cross functionally. And so that's where we come in.
Yeah.
And so linking to strategic initiatives like agile is also a business case plus strategic priority.
Right.
It is how you can effectively introduce this type of work into organizations. It's not just soft
Right.
skills and fluff. It's actually
Right.
changing mindsets, changing capacity to work collaboratively and efficiently with others.
Right. So you mentioned creativity as an attribute that got a boost from employees engaging in this practice. So were there any studies done about how the search inside yourself program or mindfulness in general was a catalyst for creativity for engineers and product people at Google?
Not rigorous studies in the sense that the data we got was what I would call self-report data,
Mhm.
and so it's pre-post. People having these trainings. Some of the engineers did report greater insights and creativity, but that's not like a randomized controlled sort of field study of the type you'd want to see if you
Yeah.
wanted to really create attribution. But we know that what we heard was that a lot of people were able to quote unquote separate the signal from the noise by being able to harness and train their focus. I remember we led a specific mindfulness practice at some point, training perceptual awareness. This is kind of
Okay.
what's been sometimes called an open awareness practice for those familiar. But really, what it trains is in your neural networks that are dedicated to perception. So, perception of the environment as well as your own thoughts and mental and emotional processes. You train both a little bit for just a few minutes. Like I'm talking
Yeah.
like no more than maybe 7 minutes, Rahul.
Okay.
Okay. And I remember there was this engineer who was in this. And afterwards, we always ask for people's comments and reflections. And he raised his hand and he said, I wasn't trying, but I solved it. And I said, what did you solve? He goes, there has been a bug that I could
Uh-huh.
not figure out. And I really understand now what it is. And I'm going to go right after
Interesting.
here and go, and go deal with that. And so I think it took him stopping for a moment,
Yeah.
pausing, and almost intentionally paying attention to like what is the broader sort of like perception here. You might say that it's more like uh, a reflection almost on like pattern recognition. What are my
Hmm.
mental patterns? What are the thought patterns? What am I experiencing and noticing? And I think he sort of
Right.
realized he was just on this one track, thinking about this bug instead of considering other data points. And apparently he came to that conclusion, understood it, and went off and did the thing. So there is
Wonderful.
value in, I think, for technical leaders in
Hmm.
training these skills that aren't completely focused on cognitive processing,
Yeah.
their perceptual processing, their attentional processing. And there is some overlap between all those things, but there are also different neural networks in your brain that you're activating when you do these
Right.
other types of exercises.
Yeah, and especially in current times where we are continuously in back to back meetings, going from one context topic to another context topic without having the opportunity to really pause, continuous Slack messages all the time. It's like a meeting that never ends,
That's right.
effectively. So,
Mm-hmm.
what other practices do you teach? Do you recommend?
Mm-hmm. So a few things, one is attention training. We also train, like I just mentioned, perceptual awareness,
Yeah.
open awareness. We also train emotional awareness. So awareness of your own emotions, as
Hmm.
well as mental awareness. So what are some of the thoughts and mindsets
Hmm.
that you're inhabiting? And then mental clarity and decision quality are things that we also work on. So how can you train mental clarity in the face of complexity?
Right.
And so there are ways to do that. So when you're able to not make decisions purely from the sympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight and react, but rather the sort of calm, focused, sort of executive function part of your brain. And
Hmm.
you could even do that through simple breathing exercises, amongst many other things.
Right. Yeah. And especially when we talk about emotions in the workplace and the stress, and there are so many different times when those emotions get heightened, whether that's a stakeholder conversation, an important presentation to leadership,
Yep.
where, there are, one of my friends used to say there are butterflies in the stomach many times, but then you have to train those butterflies to fly in formation instead of just randomly all around, right?
Well said.
so so bringing all those elements together to understand, become aware of our emotions, the stress response that gets activated because of those emotions, and these are very micro events that happen inside our body, and so to be able to become aware of them and then be able to regulate them.
Absolutely. You named so many things right there, Rahul, right? From the stress and the activation of the
Yeah.
stress response mechanisms in the brain. That's a terrible place from which to make decisions
Yeah.
and from which to collaborate and innovate. And so there are skill sets that allow you to, what you called regulate. That's the right word. The technical word is down regulate.
Hmm.
Those parts of your body and brain that are kind of going haywire in response to stress, and then bring top down regulation, meaning bringing a better calibration coming from parts of your brain like the prefrontal cortex that are responsible for executive function, for allowing those butterflies to fly in formation, as you
Right.
say, right? To allow um, thoughtful, considered, planful, deliberative action. So
Hmm.
you can strengthen parts of your brain that perform specific functions that allow you to be calm in difficult circumstances, focused when you need to be focused, aware when you need to be aware. Because there are many instances as product leaders, as team members, where you do have to be aware of other people. It's funny.
Hmm.
I like to joke that we invented search inside yourself at Google because some of the engineers there didn't realize working with other humans was in the job description. So, like, we needed to help them have tooling and skill based things that they could use to effectively work with others. And you
Yeah.
could train those parts of your brain.
Yeah. And you talked about empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a big part of just building products for other people. So is empathy coachable? Is this learnable? Or because does it require a transformation from the inside out, kind of a metamorphosis, for you to be able to tune into the other person?
Empathy is a skill. and it's trainable. And what do we mean by empathy? I would very simply define it as perspective taking.
Mm-hmm.
You have your
Okay.
perspective. What is the perspective of another? Simple as that. Good UX design starts with an empathy map,
Right.
right?
Right.
So and so is a person who you create a persona and you
Yeah.
perspective switch. And so that's not something that just happens on a design sprint or a design
Yeah.
thinking, activity, but it's actually something that you can do moment by moment. Well, what is this person? What's important to them? What are they considering? What might be they thinking? What might they be feeling? And you don't have to have a perfect answer for all of those. But even
Right.
in just asking the question, literally asking the question,
Mm-hmm.
I have an idea, but what's important to you as we discuss this? What have I not thought about?
Mm-hmm.
And what could be some other perspectives here, right? It doesn't take much, but it's important to know how to do that. And that's
Yeah.
where I get to that it's actually a skill that's trainable and you can exercise it. And the more you exercise it, the better you become at it. I want to read you a quote from somebody who went through one of our programs who's currently a senior product manager at Amazon.
Okay.
And she gave us permission to share this. Her name's Joyce Bao. And at the time, she was a senior product manager at Fitbit when she went through our program and gave this quote, but she's currently
Okay.
now a product manager at Amazon. So she said, my biggest takeaway from the Search Inside Yourself program is really about learning how to better work with my peers. As a
Mm-hmm.
product manager, especially at a fast paced company like Fitbit, I have to interface with over 50 people on a daily basis. Having to adapt to different people's needs, perspectives, priorities, and interpersonal dynamics requires me to know where my own center is.
Mm.
So I love that quote, Rahul, because it indicates that you can maintain your perspective. Empathy is not, as is commonly mistakenly thought, about kind of giving away and giving ground and ceding your perspective and just being kind of a pushover. It's not about that.
Right.
It's about
Yeah.
knowing clearly what you think and believe, but also creating enough space to, as Joyce was saying, understand the concerns of others and understand how those all come to play together, in a team.
Yeah.
Now, if I might add one other component to this, which is empathy is the building block for the next more advanced skill, which we call compassion. And
Okay.
compassion also is misunderstood. People think that compassion, when you're a leader and you're compassionate, might mean you're weak or you're giving ground again. Compassion, I would define as simply being of service and benefit
Okay.
to others, being of service and benefit to others. So here's the thing, you put the two together. When you can perspective take and
Mm-hmm.
understand your own and the other's perspective, then you can effectively be of service and benefit to the others.
Right.
Should you choose to be, right? Like you don't have to be compassionate. It's a choice, right? You can be ruthless.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how you want to lead. But if
Yeah.
you choose to lead with empathy and compassion, it's about taking perspective and then being of service and benefit to others. And when I say others, I don't just mean loyal to your team at all costs or
Yeah.
loyal to an individual. You can be very compassionate to customers, to users. There's broad application here.
Yeah.
But again, these are not well understood skill sets, and they are skill sets that if you can train, I mean, imagine, right? If you know how to take perspective effectively and you
Yeah.
know how to be of service and benefit to others, usually you call that good leadership,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
True.
that's what we train.
Right. The point that you brought up just now, which is being a compassionate leader, should not mean that you are a weak leader. And there is an element of charging hard at your goals and objectives. But then how does that sit with being compassionate and empathetic?
If you are compassionate and empathic, you will achieve those results that you're driving hard towards, and your team
Hmm.
will much more effectively. Let me give you some real life examples. Jeff Weiner, former CEO of LinkedIn, says that the primary way that he's been able to achieve what he has, the most important leadership skill for any leader is compassion. Because when
Mm.
you know how to be of service and benefit to your team and give
Right.
them what they need, you achieve those results. Mark Benioff, CEO, founder, and CEO of Salesforce, another example of someone who is
Right.
a compassionate leader, literally brings that in. They hired us to do massive trainings for not only their employees, but their customers. And then someone like Ray Diallo, Bridgewater, one of the largest sort of hedge funds out there in the world, has said that his entire success came from his meditation practice of stopping 20 minutes in the morning and
Right.
then pausing 20 minutes at night to reflect in silence. So these, again, have real world implications, not just
Right.
fluff. These folks you could point to as probably being mindful, empathic, and compassionate leaders,
Yeah.
and their success speaks for itself.
Yeah. So going back to your time at Google with executive development, when leaders get to a certain stage in their career journey, at some point, you are senior directors, VPs, SVPs. People are smart. They're hardworking. They have built a strong track record. They've built strong teams. They have the relationship and support within the organization. So, what separates people at that level, where only some people get an opportunity to progress further, for example?
Oh, that's a huge question. Like what separates people? Um, at that stage, I think one of the key things that I've seen is you need to understand how to be a leader of leaders,
Hmm.
which means that you have, I think the core ingredient there is trust. You've cultivated trust
Hmm.
among those leaders who are now following you as the leader of leaders. So, how does trust get cultivated? I think you have to bring a certain level of awareness. In fact, we have like a formula. We call it AVP, and it is a formula. And so there is a denominator, which is
Okay.
self-orientation. So this is derived from a body of work that was earlier called Trusted Advisor. It's a book. They ran big studies on
Okay.
this. We've kind of adapted and modified their trust equation. But the trust equation is awareness, vulnerability, and purpose over self-orientation. So what I mean
Okay.
by that is, first of all, you're aware, right? You're aware of, we were talking earlier about being responsive versus
Right.
reactive. So you have that skill. You're aware of when you need to be responsive versus reactive. You're also aware of the position you occupy. And, leaders have a huge microphone, as we say. If you sneeze, if
Hmm.
you have a bad day and you have a stomach ache and you're bent over like this with a frown, people are going to interpret that a
Yeah.
million different ways. So you have to be aware positionally of where you are and its implications for those around you, how you're showing up. You have to be vulnerable, so you have to be willing to speak to the opportunities and also like the dire challenges in an
Yeah.
authentic way,
Yeah.
right? Without sugarcoating it, because people are going to smell it and they're going to know. So in order for them to trust you, you need to be somewhat vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And paint the picture and also the reality of things as they are. And then you have to have a very clear sense of purpose. Why are you doing this? And why does
Hmm.
this matter for this organization? And you need to be able to articulate that clearly. So there's the communication and influence skills that come in
Yeah.
there. So all that matters, awareness, vulnerability, purpose. And then the denominator, the bigger the denominator, as we know, the more it degrades the numerator,
Right.
or divides the numerator. And so the denominator is self-orientation. So if you're only about you, if you're being aware and vulnerable and purpose driven,
Right.
only because you're trying to better yourself, again, people are going to smell it. So when you could work on all three of those things in the numerator, and you look at, I think currently, if you look at Sundar Pichai, right? I think
Hmm.
he's great, really great communicator. He's a trusted leader,
Hmm.
right? He's talked about the pivots that have needed to be made. So he's been vulnerable. He's spoken quite openly about AI and its
Yeah.
opportunities and threats. And believe me, he's aware of all that stuff. He is very aware that he's doing all that stuff. And he's not
Yeah.
doing it to self aggrandize. I would not call Sundar a self aggrandizing leader. So his self orientation is fairly low. And
Hmm.
so you can see how that trust equation, or someone like Bill Gates, right? There's a credibility factor, a trust factor there.
Yeah.
These are examples of leaders who I think demonstrate that next level skill. And that next level skill, I would say, is centers on trust.
Right. I love that equation: awareness,
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability,
Purpose
purpose,
divided
and
by
divided by
self-orientation.
self orientation.
Yeah.
And I was speaking with someone, senior product manager, very smart individual, and they have an opportunity to now become a team lead, a director, and have some anxiety around what does it mean to be a first time leader of a team. And so those are some interesting aspects of growth. And how do you then change your way of thinking and context around your performance versus your team's performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're interrelated,
Yeah.
right? Like you'll perform well if your team performs well and you
Right.
have a good relationship with them and have empathy, but also, like I was saying, build trust
Yeah.
by being vulnerable, by clearly articulating purpose, by managing self orientation,
Yeah.
and then by exercising empathy and compassion. So this is a
Yeah.
great, I'm glad you set that up because it kind of brings all the elements together that we
Right.
talked about, Rahul.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
We've come to the rapid fire section of our discussion conversation here.
Okay.
Which book have you recommended the most to people? Obviously, No Search Inside Yourself, and I love that book. But any other books that come to your mind?
I love Yuval Noah Harari's work.
Hmm.
The book on 20th century leadership. Of course, start with *Sapiens*, but you
Yeah.
can read all of them, and they can be really effective. I really like Mark Benioff's book, *Trailblazer*. So it's a little bit of a memoir, but you see how he's built a
Hmm.
purpose-driven company with a lot of these qualities. And I like Howard Schultz's book also,
Hmm.
also documenting Starbucks' journey as a
Right.
values-based company. It's called Onward. So those are all books that I find really important and really helpful.
Great. And in terms of your personal practice for mindfulness, tell us a little bit about how you find the time in your busy schedule as a CEO to make sure that you have a consistent practice.
So I'm an early riser, early to bed, early awake, and one of the first things I do when I get up is I sit and I meditate. Usually around the 20-minute, 10 to 20 minutes, preferably 20 minutes, unless I have to really be somewhere. Pretty much every day. And
Hmm.
then we have practices, micro practices. I usually start every meeting that I'm in with a minute to arrive, so I get a few more
Yeah.
minutes throughout the course of a day. So I integrate it throughout the course of my day as well.
Excellent. Wonderful. Rich, thank you so much for taking your time to be on this show and all the wisdom that you've shared. I know this is going to be a lot of great takeaways for all of us.
Thank you so much, Rahul, and thanks everyone for listening. Great to be with you.